Good morning, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. This is episode 93, and we're joined by two repeat guests, a very special guest. And this is actually the fourth, edition of the Assange case, especially Julian Assange, it was the founder of WikiLeaks, a publisher. Um, you can call him a whistleblower, you can call him a political prisoner. We're going to get into all that today. But I want to introduce Paula Iasella and Susan McLucas. They previously joined in episodes 13 and 20. Paula was actually in episode 67 as well. And Julia Hansen joined us in episode 67 as well. And previously in episodes 13 and 20, Mike Michioli also joined Susan and Paula. But I just want to say, since my audience is pretty familiar with y'all, welcome back to the show. And we really appreciate you sharing this knowledge with a wider public. And thanks for accepting the invitation again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kiko.
Appreciate you more than you can ever know here at Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum, because honestly, you all are probably the first introduction to a lot of people when it comes to Julian Assange as far as who he is. And as anything involving WikiLeaks, we've documented the persecution. We understand what Julian is going through, but we also want to focus on the value, not just his personal persecution right now, but also what is available to the public as far as what he has exposed and what his organization has exposed. Before we do that, I'm going to give a slight ad and say that I think it's very important to support independent media. Yeah, I'm not saying that just to say it. I really mean it. I'm not really in this for any kind of monetary gain. I'm a professor by trade, and so it's my job. I feel like it's my job to inform people, and this is my way of sort of giving back to the public outside of the walls of academia, which I'm currently not a part of academia right now, technically, but this is kind of academia outside of the brick and mortar version of the university that we associate professors with. And so this is my way of sort of giving back to the public, communicating more directly with the public. I want to talk directly to activists, people on the ground. And Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum is an international community. We have 44% of our audience located outside of the United States. That was always the point, to make this an international community. So with that balance, we have international perspectives, we have global perspectives, local, national, global. You can't have one without the other. We feel like it's important to have on-ground activists, people who have maybe secondhand experience, but people who are obviously dealing with the situations themselves. Sometimes we have people's families involved on the show, but any kind of knowledge we can get to enrich the conversation and grow the knowledge base for the average person in the world. That's what our goal is here. So I just say to subscribe for free. It doesn't cost you a dime, just a little bit of your time to expand your mind. And remember, you can't unthink free thought. I want to start by, and Susan and Paula, either person can really start as far as if you were to talk to a person on the street or anywhere, as far as asking, like, I've heard about this Assange person, Julian Assange. What would be the first thing you would describe to that person as far as Julian Assange is concerned, in maybe a paragraph, to someone who doesn't know anything about him or the case?
Well, Julian Assange is a brilliant journalist and activist who invented the website WikiLeaks, which allows whistleblowers to share information that their employer probably doesn't want the public to know about. And his big source is Chelsea Manning, who was a Army intelligence officer in the war in Iraq, and he saw these things that just he at the time, but anyhow, she saw these things that were just really bothering her, and went to her supervisors, and they said, "Oh, fine, just make a report and put it in the drawer." And she said, "No, this is important. People are dying." And so she finally went to WikiLeaks, and Julian Assange said, "This is important." And he shared it with a lot of big newspapers, and they published the Iraq war logs with day-by-day reports of what was happening a lot of really terrible stuff. Civilians getting killed because they got too close to a checkpoint, civilians being killed from the air with laughing soldiers, just enjoying the thing as if it were a video game. And so the Iraq war logs, the Afghan war logs, the Guantanamo files about all the torture at Guantanamo, and then a whole bunch of secret diplomatic cables. And 2010 was the big year when Julian Assange and WikiLeaks released all of his stuff, most of it. And so our government was pretty upset about that, and they are trying to bring him to the States and put him in jail for 175 years using the Espionage Act, the first time that the Espionage Act has been used against a publisher. So we think Julian Assange is a hero, and some people think he's a traitor. If you think it's really bad to embarrass the U.S., I'd like to see the U.S. going after the people who did those war crimes instead of the person who's exposing them.
Absolutely. Paula, would you like to add something to what Susan mentioned?
Right. When you talk about WikiLeaks and Assange, you have to remember that they publish over 10 million documents. Not one had to be retracted, not one. And that no other media outlet can make that claim. And also, it's important to know that the same documents he's being prosecuted for are the same that won him dozens of international journalism and peace awards. He's also been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 18 times since 2011. So I don't know of any terrorist that gets nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, because that's how the U.S. is trying to paint him. But that's what they're going to do to people that expose their crimes.
Something, while you all were introducing this topic to a wider audience, I was thinking about really the whole idea around this word information. You've heard within the last 6, 7, 8 years, regardless of what the topic is, there's always been this constant debate about things labeled as information, misinformation, disinformation. We're in the information war, whether people subscribe to that view or not. We are in an information war. We've been in the information war for a while. And if this isn't any sort of evidence to that, I don't know what would convince the average person that we aren't in an information war, because this is exactly what it is. And that's the reason why I also think it's important to make things available to the public, such as like a podcast, anything, the WikiLeaks organization itself. I think this is the danger that we're in when information is power, information is important. And I think when certain types of information is shared, it shows it's really the government's admission that maybe we're only allowed to get that information and everyone else isn't allowed to get this information. I think the biggest problem against Assange is that because he's actually opening up a worldwide discussion. He's giving the world like basically information that would be available otherwise to inform the public. We talk about the importance of education. The sad part is that this is informing the public. This is debunking, quote unquote, misinformation. Like you said, 10 million documents, none have had to be retracted. That's a threat to so-called legacy media. I think Mike made that point the first few episodes, that we associate the legacy media as legitimate, but the fact that they've had to retract stories and this independent publisher, Julian Assange, hasn't had to retract any sort of stories. To me, I think that's also a threat to the overall like information vacuum that we have in place. It's not an echo chamber. And I think that's really the biggest danger that someone would, I guess, make. That would be the government's argument, which I obviously don't agree with that position. But I think that's the government's way of kind of using him as almost this litmus test of um, we're not going to have this happen. Someone be actually objective, someone that's actually a journalist. And it should be the standard that any sort of journalistic organization should try to live up to, is the example that Julian has kind of laid to people, is it should be information available to everyone and not pick and choose what stories you want to publish. And I think that's honestly been the biggest differentiator between him and any sort of journalist or organization that we're accustomed to. And that threatens the system, because the system wants to keep a protocol. And this is not a protocol. This is simply let the people decide for themselves once they have the information.
That's right.
That's
I was
all great points, Kiko, because that's actually Assange's mission statement. He felt like he could change the balance of power by giving information to the people. And we have to remember that the invention of the press was to get information out to the people. And then there was a power grab by the powerful to keep it all to themselves and keep people in the dark. And he tried to turn that upside down. So that was a good point you made.
I also I was kind of, and this would be kind of like my last I won't call it a rant. It's not a rant. I don't want to say that, but it'll be my last kind of way of sharing perspective. And then I'm going to let you all kind of take it from here and expand on it and talk more about the evidence files and talk more about this upcoming 20th and 21st date in February with the high courts in the UK. I lie. I may have a little bit to add once you all discuss that. But I want to say that I have a background in literature, and I actually thought about Assange because my first novel in my dissertation actually deals with a political prisoner. And that raises the question, what do people consider a political prisoner? Well, just to give you a brief description of this person, this protagonist that I worked with in a Haitian novel, it was in 1955. It was published. It was called General Son, My Brother. In Spanish, Mi Compadre General Sol. And it's about a Black person kind of leaving the underbelly of society in Haiti. And he met a political prisoner named Pierre Rommel. And it kind of documents the whole idea of the Haitian Revolution. It's kind of a fictionalized version of the Haitian Revolution. But the point being made is that they end up locating him to a high security prison. But once he's in that high security prison, he actually becomes legitimized by the same government that's trying to torture him. So he goes from this person, this peasant, quote unquote, to all of a sudden the government legitimizing him as a political threat to the system, because he meets this Pierre Rommel person that actually ends up being his neighbor. And so he learns more and more. He grows his knowledge. He learns a lot about his country. He learns a lot about his surroundings and society. And he becomes a threat because he's associated with this infamous prison called Fort Demange, which was actually, I think, a U.S.-based prison. The U.S. created that prison specifically in Haiti. And so I think it's interesting because we're dealing with Assange now, a person who is an Australian citizen who is being persecuted by a foreign entity, in this case, the United States. He's caught up now in the UK. As we all know, he's in Belmarsh high security prison right now. But it raises the whole idea of political prisoner. What do people mean when they say that word? It's used a lot more now. We have people like Leonard Peltier, for instance. We have Mumia Abu Jamal. We have other people in similar situations for different reasons. But I want to expand on that point about a political prisoner. And I want you all to kind of tell people what makes Julian Assange a political prisoner when people are using all these smears against him.
Well, I can start with that, unless Susan has something. Yeah, so I can say what I think it is. I think our Boston group learned firsthand what it means. We had a letter campaign and a Zoom meeting with the senators of Massachusetts for over a year. So they are extremely well informed on the Assange case. We brought out the hypocrisy of Senator Elizabeth Warren coming out against the prosecution in 2019 while Trump was president, but hasn't said a word on it since. So she proved to us that Julian Assange is being used as a political tool because she's not expressing her integrity or her standards or her real feelings about press freedom, only if it can be used against the opposition. So that is my definition of a political prisoner defined by our Senator Elizabeth Warren.
And the fact that the U.S. is holding him or asking their friends in the U.K. to hold him, even though they espouse belief in free speech and a free press, but still, since this guy embarrassed them, they want him. And that takes precedence over the so-called principles of free speech, which we take seriously. Unfortunately, the government doesn't.
I think it's just odd that it's one person. Normally, when you have a situation like this, and I don't want to get other issues added into this, but just like you have like the January 6th stuff, you had like a bunch of people implicated. This is one person that they're implicating. That it's like WikiLeaks is a company, it's an organization, it's a publisher. But it's not just Julian that's a part of WikiLeaks, but why are they just going after one person? That's the most odd thing ever, that one person has the keys to everything. You know, it's like, didn't they end up letting Chelsea go? And that's the confusion, I think, to people, because they asked me that, like, Kiko, how is it that Chelsea Manning, how is it that she's free, but Julian isn't free, when that's the person that gave Julian the information in the first place?
Well, no one has ever accused our government of being consistent. You know, they use whatever little principle suits them at the moment.
Also, it's very different because Chelsea Manning worked for the government, so she was expected to not reveal documents from the government. Julian Assange is a whole different story. He is a journalist. So what's happening, doing the evidence files, I ran across the court-martial, I'm sorry, the court-martial hearing documents that said Assange's lawyers felt like what it was is being Assange was mentioned so many times in that court-martial that they felt it was really they were setting it up to go after Assange, because if they can prosecute Julian Assange under the Espionage Act, it gives them free rein to go after other journalists. And so what actually his prosecution is about is criminalizing journalism. So that's a first, that's a big deal, and that's never happened before. And it also puts a chilling effect. So it's not only one man, it's keeping everyone else, all the other journalists, watching what they're publishing. So it's much broader than Julian Assange. They went after him because he's so famous, and his the documents that he leaked published back in 2010. There's never been anything like that. That was revealed more publications than all the other mainstream media put together, and it was devastating to the government.
Mm-hmm. And as you all mentioned in previous episodes, the same legacy media legitimized the claims, like all the evidence, and co-signed and said that Assange was truthful about all the stuff. WikiLeaks was truthful about everything. The Spiegel, the New York Times, all these different publications, but yet doesn't that make them complicit too? I mean, if you're going to use Julian as an example, I mean, you have other organizations basically saying, okay, they're doing the same thing he did. I mean, it's almost like the right to be a publisher. He doesn't have a right to be a publisher. They're using his background against him, because I saw some stuff about how people are still using him when he was part of the hacker community. They're still using that stuff as a way to say, well, he's a hacker. He's not really a publisher. He's a hacker. And it's almost like the government creating its own definition of what things are. He's clearly a journalist. He's clearly a publisher. But again, I guess there's just too much that he's exposed at this point for the government to really do anything but go all in after him. So the question now remains, what is the saving grace for Julian Assange? That's what I guess people would want to know now. Like, what could we do? What are we waiting for? What decision is ultimately going to set him free? And could someone speak to that? Like, what is something that we're going to expect as far as his freedom is concerned? Like, what will it take for him to ultimately be free from all this?
Well, we finally have a court date in the UK when they're going to have their final extradition hearing, February 20th and 21st. And it's 2 days long, which means they'll have some time to look into some substantive issues that were not allowed to be brought up the first time. Like, how can you put a publisher in jail for publishing true information? It's unprecedented. You know, if we say we like free speech and free press, then that just is wrong. And so a lot of attention is focused on the February 20th hearing. Will have protests all around the world or rallies in support of Assange. First, on the first day, February 20th, they're rallying in front of the Royal Courts of Justice, where the hearing will be. And then the second day, they'll be marching to Downing Street. And in Boston, we'll be at the State House at noon on February 20th.
Mm-hmm. And this will obviously be covered, probably Consortium News, I'm thinking. They tend to I get a lot of the information, if it's not from you all, it's from Consortium News when it deals with anything with Assange.
Yeah, they're good.
And as a matter of fact, a few days ago, they did a stream, I think, and I think Richard Medhurst mentioned a gentleman, David Mendoza.
That's right.
Which he's a Spaniard that was able to get his attorney to basically avoid extradition. They were trying to extradite him like they're doing Assange to the United States, and they were able to, control that some kind of a way. I'm sure that Julian has a lot of representation when it comes to legal representation. The question remains, what is going to happen? Let's just say, for instance, that the courts want to continue with the extradition. Is there anything Julian can do to combat that? To come up with a new strategy if they try to demand the extradition to the United States? If the high courts decide that, what would Julian be able to do in that situation? Is there anything he could do?
I believe this is his last chance at in the UK court system. The next one would be submitting to the European Court of Human Rights. This is really now or never. That's the hashtag on Day X, which is February 20th and 21st. People are saying it's now or never. And I mean, there's all these last-ditch efforts, like the Australian parliamentarian group that's called Bring Julian Home. They wrote to the courts in UK last week, or maybe 10 days ago, calling on something you touched on, Kiko, about David Mendoza. How do you
Mendoza.
Mendoza. that was a prime example of the U.S.'s so-called assurances. Yes, we're going to make these assurances that the conditions aren't going to be bad, that he'll be able to serve out his time with his family in Spain. Years went by, and they appealed it in court. And so the U.S. assurances are not worth the paper they're written on. And this was brought up in court. And those assurances are the U.S. assurances that no, Julian Assange would not be put in horrible conditions in the U.S. Prison system. And those assurances overturned the original ruling to stop the extradition back in 2021. The magistrate, barrister, she overturned it. She said he cannot be extradited because of his health condition and the conditions of the U.S. prison system. So the U.S. comes back with flimsy assurances, and the UK courts agree to that just because it's one country trusting the assurances of another. So this Australian parliamentarian group they say that has to be investigated, independently investigated, the assurances, and before they can even rule on this extradition. So there are a lot of things. I don't know what kind of wedge that could be put in this system that just seems to be rolling along to extradite him. Nothing is stopping it. So we're all hoping that something will, that, the alternative, even if they agree to hear the appeal, they could keep Julian in that supermax prison another 9 months before a court date is, set up. So that's how they don't assassinate our truth tellers, our heroes. What they do, they throw them in prison, and it's called lawfare, that just keep him in a solitary confinement already. 1,757 days in solitary confinement. And he hasn't been convicted in it. He's just there on remand. So at the wishes to be held by the U.S. So we'll see. I'm really curious to see what is ruled on. I have a feeling that they may grant the appeal, the defense appeal, just because they don't want him here. I mean, do they really want to bring the journalist, the first journalist being prosecuted under the espionage, do they really want to bring him to the U.S. when they have, they have this genocide going on and so many issues and during election cycle? I don't know.
So we're hoping for the best, but it's a big unknown. We'll find out. But what if we talk about the resolution in the House of Representatives?
Absolutely. I was going to get to that. I had one more question before we get to the resolution, and that is, a person actually approached me a few weeks ago and they asked me about the pardon aspect of this. And the question specifically was, what if he got extradited to the United States and whoever is the president, could they technically pardon him while he's here? And could he be freed that way? Or why come he can't be pardoned in the UK if he's in the UK? Why can't the parliament pardon? Why can't they make a decision on that if he's in their country?
I think you have to be convicted to be pardoned.
Mm.
Does that sound right?
I'm not sure about that, because there are several candidates saying on the first day of their presidency they will free Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. That's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has made that claim. Marianne Williamson, Cornel West, they're
Probably Jill Stein.
Jill Stein. Jill Stein. So there are several that would free him. It is just a stroke of the pen. I mean,
it might be more dropping the charges. If he hasn't been convicted, it'd be a question of dropping the charges, but still it would be within the executive power.
Exactly.
And the catch-22 to this is something that Paula mentioned earlier. this will undoubtedly be used as political bait. I can already see it. I've already heard things. Um, and again, those are still promises because that doesn't mean that the person is going to do it just because they say that they're going to pardon him. Hypothetically, I mean, they could easily say it. I mean, we're in another election cycle, and how convenient that Assange is brought up all over again. Like all this stuff is happening when you have Gaza happening, you have all different types of events around the world happening. And it seems like Assange is kind of put in the mainstream media in those cycles at certain times. And unfortunately, this could be another political exploitation coming up now. I know when Vivek was also running for president before he dropped out, he kept saying that he would pardon Assange, that he's innocent, 100% innocent. But what is actually going to happen, if there is a change, if there isn't a change. Um, and I would argue that there isn't a change because the Trump administration had several opportunities, all opportunities on board to pardon him while he was in office. Nothing was done. Obama didn't do anything about it. There is just the baton passing it down the road. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, what's to say that anything would change, regardless of who gets in?
Well, what Obama did was not prosecute. He wanted to. He was upset with Assange, but he didn't think that he could bring charges. It was Trump who did it. And a lot of us were expecting, well, Biden is sort of like Obama, but not as much as we were hoping.
Well, Obama also promised to close Guantanamo, and we saw how that worked out.
Yeah.
So who's really pulling the strings. We know that the military industrial complex is pulling the strings on a lot of these decisions, and I'm certainly why Guantanamo was never closed.
Yeah.
Pentagon.
Susan, when you mentioned the resolution, are you referring to the Thomas Massie, that resolution especially? Is that the one you're referring to?
Well, he's one of the co-sponsors, but it was brought by Representative Paul Gosar,
Okay.
a Republican. It's got 9 reps that have signed on, only 2 Democrats, but it's called House Resolution 934. And it says it's expressing the sense of the House of Representatives that regular journalistic activities are protected under the First Amendment, and that the United States ought to drop all charges against and attempts to extradite Julian Assange. Pretty straightforward, and putting the emphasis on free speech, and it's a bipartisan effort. We're not quite sure why it only has 9 reps so far and why there's nothing in the Senate similar, but we're doing a big campaign. We're asking everybody to call their representative and lots of representatives. You can call any senator or rep at 202-224-3121. And you just ask for the office you want, and you tell them that you want them to sign on to Resolution 934 to free Julian Assange. And after you call your own rep, we suggest that you call Barbara Lee, and especially we want the people at the Judiciary Committee to get calls. Jerry Nadler is the Democratic ranking member, and Jim Jordan is the Republican chair of that meeting, of that committee. And just call whoever you can think of, and tell them we need that resolution to pass.
I was really excited about this resolution, and I don't get very excited about these sort of things, but it's the first bit of real legislation going through Congress right now. We've had several letters written, the Tlaib letter back in April. We had the McGovern-Massey bipartisan letter written. to stop the extradition. But this is actual legislation, and they're not binding law, but legislation expresses the collective sentiment of the House of Representatives. And if it goes to a vote or a hearing, which I'm very, very hopeful that it will, that means it gets C-SPAN coverage. It's another way to get the Assange case out into the public that media and government has so desperately tried to cover up. So I created a postcard campaign online, and I used my friend and Batiza's list of government abuses on one of them. And it just basically says why Congress must fight to stop the U.S. extradition. And then it just lists all the abuses by the CIA. That's unbelievable. And then on the back, it has a little excerpt of the resolution. But fortunately, this postcard campaign I started online has now been funded. So we're going to take this postcard and canvass all of Congress, all 435 members. We're going to canvass them from all across the country. Activists are having postcard parties, and it's so this is our effort. I mean, I'm really, really optimistic because it's a Republican-sponsored bill that has been introduced to a Republican-led House Judiciary Committee. So, and the chair of that, like Susan said, is Jim Jordan. He chaired the congressional hearings of the Twitter files, trying to show the abuses of government, the weaponization of government, social media, trying to control free speech and censoring voices during COVID. And so I'm very, very hopeful that that Jim Jordan will pick this up because he has advocated for free speech before, but we do know he's a political tool, and that stops good people from doing the right thing. So that's how our government works.
The other way that people can support that is by writing either a letter or a postcard to their rep or other reps, and you don't need special addresses. You can send any representative a mailing at U.S. House of Representatives, Washington, D.C., 20515. That's all you need for an address. And we want to have their offices flooded with messages, phone calls, postcards, letters. They have to hear that the public wants Julian Assange to be free.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And this is also, so up until this point, H.R.934 only has 9 people who have signed on this completely out of the 435 possibilities.
It's not too promising.
Yeah,
we have some time.
That is
Yeah.
I don't even know if puzzling is the right word to use. It's just it's
Yeah, we're
pathetic.
scratching our
Pathetic.
heads.
Pathetic is the word I was looking for. Pathetic is the word I was looking for.
It's not too good, but there's time for them to step up.
But it's I just don't know, and I try not to. People know that I'm a political person, and they know that this is political forum, a cultural forum. But it's hard for people to make a case to legitimize in Congress when I hear stuff like this. And I don't know if people can use their vote as a leverage tool in this kind of a situation, because I have a lot of friends, I have lots of groups I associate with where this is a serious issue. The criminal justice system. In this case, this is intersecting with a lot of different issues. First Amendment, press freedom, international relations, war crimes, which we can also talk about, tie this into Gaza too, which is an ongoing catastrophe right now. Just the Israeli lobby has bought out all these politicians, and we can clearly see
Biden more than any.
Oh yeah, it's really scary, but I don't know about the whole. To me, this calls into question the legitimacy of the government, our government. I don't know how people can, in clear conscience, say that they voted matters how any of this stuff matters when you have a situation like this where your own Congress isn't even supporting the Constitution. I mean,
It is pathetic.
it doesn't even matter what, this isn't even a partisan issue. That's the crazy thing about it, as exemplified by the Australian politicians that came to DC. It's not even a partisan issue. That's what's so
Right. It was
confusing
all
to me.
sides. Yeah.
It's just, you would think that this would be just a rallying cry. This would be a symbol of people. Like, why don't we come together around something, and maybe this expands into other things? I mean, maybe that's too much of a dream, but to me, this would be a great opportunity. And even for an independent person running for office to get more traction because of an issue like this. But I don't know
Well,
if
there's
it's
so
just
much.
because all the information is kind of tunneled in and controlled. I don't know why people aren't more on board with it. I don't know.
There's so much disinformation around Julian Assange. The government has succeeded in painting him in a very negative light. And that's why Paula put together her evidence files. And maybe we should spend a few minutes talking about that.
No doubt. It's a 101 page document. And from my understanding, there had to be a lot that went into that, like just tedious hours, all the different the passports, the journalistic credentials of Assange, pretty much anything you want to know about the case is there as a book. Um, I don't want to be too selfish asking this, but are you all going to make that a book? Like, I know you're not into promoting yourselves or anything, but could you see this as being like a project down the road, even not? Or is this going to be pretty much something that people are going to have if they want to do whatever they want to do with it?
So we're leaving it up to individual activists to print
Mm-hmm.
this. They printed it and left hard copies at offices on the Hill. I plan on sending one to Barbara Lee because her, more than anyone, she was the sole vote against the war in Congress.
Iraq.
And when WikiLeaks came out a decade later, proving that she was on the right side of history, and so she, more than anyone in Congress, should be advocating for free speech and advocating for anti-war journalism, exposing, the crimes of state. So the evidence files, it's a collection of things off my desktop, Kiko. I mean, one of my jobs, I'm an activist on the street with Susan, but I'm also very active online where I'll read an article, say it's written by especially a U.S. Outlet. I write to them and I'll send them a rebuttal and to debunk what they said. And most of the time I never hear back, but one time I was very gratified to hear back from a Common Dreams journalist, and he asked for more information. He thanked me, and from then on, he became such a great writer about Assange because he would just report on the facts and the tweets that were circulating. He became an excellent writer on Assange. So that was my one success story. And so I took everything, most of the stuff off my desk, and I put in here because this is the way I learn and understand things. It's quite visual. It's screenshots of, like you talked about, how can the Guardian and that not be prosecuted? Well, that's called selective prosecution. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ellsberg came forward, John Young from Cryptome, who actually published the documents first before WikiLeaks, were never hounded. They never came after John Young. They never asked him to take it down off the internet. It's still there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's selective prosecution. So I just was inspired to take all my my information by an article. My friend Ann Batiza, who helped with the postcard, she talks about the importance of evidence. And she wrote this to her community on World Press Freedom Day a couple years ago. And it talks about had we not have the video from that teenager, what was her name? Darnella Fraser's video, which they tried to take from her. If we didn't have video of what happened, there would have been no justice.
To
So
George Floyd.
yes, that's the George Floyd case. I'm sorry, that's the George Floyd case. Niels Meltzer weighed in on that, and they said if the U.S. prosecutors did the same as they did with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, as they did the same with George Floyd case, it would mean that the police officers go free. They're not even being investigated, not tried or convicted. They're not even being arrested and investigated. While the person who filmed this and put it on the internet would be in solitary confinement for the rest of her life, this teenager. So it was a really great article. And I was thinking today before the show, Kiko, that the fact that WikiLeaks was pure evidence is the thing that got him prosecuted. And the thing that will save him is more evidence on him, like trying to debunk all the misinformation. So I basically put it in, my book is divided into 10 files, and I try to think of everything that's been used against him, that, it refutes the hacker narrative. The Espionage Act is an illegitimate tool to suppress the First Amendment. WikiLeaks did responsible redaction process. It did not put lives at risk. There's evidence that the CIA spied on and plotted to kill Julian Assange. Assange prosecution is a targeted political selective prosecution. And there's evidence of U.S. war crimes revealed in collateral murder video. And so I tried to cover the Swedish case, debunk that was. There's a lot of evidence that debunks that. And what are some of the others? The evidence of Assange's deteriorated health in prison. And I include a lot of the witness statements, testimonies from the extradition hearing back in 2020. And my favorite one is file number 10. It was from a Twitter thread by Alina Lilova saying that Assange is a political prisoner. The independent judiciary is a fairy tale in political cases, because they always say, oh, we can't, from Senator Warren, oh, we can't comment on that. That's a legal case. And we trust the judicial system. We trust Merrick Garland. Well, it's a fairy tale when it's a political prisoner. So I hope activists will use this to get more knowledgeable, because you kind of have a feeling, well, I know the Swedish thing wasn't right. Well, this has all the evidence when you're talking to friends and that about it, trying to, we had a conversation, Susan and I, with this woman at First Night, writing on the, after our action we were on the T. And she said, well, I really do support him, but I do not agree with that, the Swedish case and that. Well, and I had information actually to help inform her on that, or re-inform her. So
it just proves more that this is an information war. And I feel like more than ever, you have to have almost 5 green lights in your favor against the one strike against you. You can't have one green light versus the one strike. You have to have 5 versus 1. That's the type of convincing you have to win over the public, because we know that word of mouth is powerful. You can convince one person, that person can convince another person. But we're having to do this micro type of managing of society when we're already isolated in all these bubbles, when we got information. And you have the Congress reflecting that. And I'm curious to get this stat, the H.R.934. How many people from the so-called squad have signed on to that? I'm curious. We're talking about
Ilhan Omar, I think, is the only one.
Omar is the only one out of that group. Jayapal, none of them. AOC, none of them. Just Omar.
We don't know why.
It's absolutely ridiculous. And then Bernie's pretty much been a ghost. It, like, ever since that movement back in 2015, you had all that momentum. and it's almost like it's just a ghost at this point, just a phantom presence. And just the support base has been so dilapidated. People have gone all whichever direction you want to talk about when you talk about political journey. And I'm just like, was that kind of like the point, just for people to just fizzle out and go their own way? I don't know, but the people, I'm talking directly to the people. We really can't put confidence into our politicians to do things. We have to use our own minds to kind of we have to use this information and do it ourselves, because clearly our direction is not there in Congress. Our direction is not there above. So we're going to have to do something. This is going to be a grassroots effort. People like Paula and Susan, we're going to have to be the people to step up, because we're not getting the leadership that we need. And people who do have way more influence, they're just not doing anything about it, clearly. And I don't know if they're compromised. I don't know what's going on, but you would think that this would be the truth seeker, the truth speakers that we've associated with in the past. I don't know where they are, and I don't know if they're ever going to come back.
Yeah. Well, we should give our national website for the Assange Defense. It's AssangeDefense.org. And Paula, do you want to give your email address? It's pretty easy to remember.
Sure. Yes, you can contact me at AssangeBoston@gmail.com.
Okay, and just to I want to give a shout out to we lost a truth seeker and a truth teller December 30th. This past year, right before the new year. John Pilger was an Australian author, writer, journalist, documentarian. And we lost John. John was a big advocate of Julian Assange, not only Assange, but just a lot of different social advocacy issues over the years. And we lost Daniel Ellsberg in the summer last year.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of overlap with Ellsberg. We had Randy Keeler. His niece came onto the show. Julie Hansen came onto the show, episode 67. And so there's just these things are affecting a lot of people. These issues, we got to keep that in mind. This is a human experience. The Julian Assange case is a human experience. This is a human rights issue. At its basic core, that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with if Assange is ultimately, like, if he doesn't get justice, and at this point, it's sad that we're even having a debate, like, what does justice even resemble? Like, what is justice at this point? He's gone through so much. And even if he is able to be quote unquote free, look at how much damage has been done to him, his family, the people who have been around him. And he's never going to be the same person, obviously. I mean, it's just, he's gone through just more than we can even document. But I wanted to also touch on something before we go and mention how we tie this into Gaza, because I was very curious. It seems like he published about so much stuff. And that's why even I asked, I believe it's episode 20. I wasn't trying to get conspiratorial. I know we talk about stuff like that on this show. Because I know Whitney Well published her book last year that talked about, all these different issues with Epstein. And I was like, well, hell, Assange, he's written about so much. Does he have any thing to write about Epstein? Does he know anything about that? And Paula sent this document about Gaza, the Israeli intelligence stuff. Can we talk a little bit about that before we go? How this ties into the ongoing conflict with well, not conflict, that's not even the right word. This the massacre against the Palestinians by the Israeli government.
I think Susan probably knows a little bit more about it, that can speak more freely. I know that we've been trying to go to actions to support Palestine, and we did that on first night. We had an action at Park Street Station, then we went over and joined the Palestine March. And it's a really easy connection. We did a a handout that says, what does WikiLeaks tell us about Israeli war crimes in Palestine? And there's, it's mostly diplomatic cables going between countries that expose the real intention of governments. And do you want to speak a little bit on that, Susan, the couple?
Sure. The U.S. has said for a long time that it opposes any expanded settlements in the occupied territories, but then WikiLeaks released a secret accord that showed that the U.S. and Israel both think that just a natural expansion of settlements is okay, no problem. And then just 2 weeks after the October 7th attack, the Israeli intelligence made a plan that WikiLeaks released, showing that even though Assange is in prison, WikiLeaks is still active. They released this plan that showed that their intention was what a lot of us figured was probably happening. Tell the Gazans to move to the south for safety, bomb the north, then bomb the south too, and try to get Egypt to open up its doors and let the Palestinians all flee into Egypt. And then the Israelis would very generously help build some tent cities for them to live in Egypt, just get them out of Gaza.
Mm.
Yeah, and we also know from WikiLeaks that Israel intentionally, their plan was to keep Gaza on the brink of economic collapse.
Yeah.
That's what an occupied territory does. I mean, you keep those people helpless and economically poor, and able to really defend themselves on, and the fact that they're not considered a state, and tells you everything you need to know about it being an occupied territory.
Yeah.
But so WikiLeaks published all these documents between, heads of state discussing these plans, and then they come out and say the opposite. They're pushing the two-state solution, knowing full well it's not going to work. So they keep that, in the, some hope, but they know they're pushing something that's not a reality. So.
And for that reason, I've been trying to pursue Sarah Roy to come onto the show with her book that talks about the Gazan economy and the effects of this, the onslaughts towards Gaza. And this has been going on for so many years. Norman Finkelstein's been on the show a couple of times, and he's talked about all these different operations that it seems like when Israel seems fit, they decide to go attack Gaza just at will. And I don't even know what the death count is at this point, just with the latest post October 7th. Just with all the civilians dying, funded through world governments. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, all these different military complexes around the world are contributed to this destruction, because Israel wouldn't even have the weapons to use against the Palestinians and the Gazans if it wasn't for all the money that's already accounted for in a military budget, for instance, which I believe is even increased more, and the statistics are worse, because I think even from last year, compared to the next 10 countries combined, their military budgets, ours would still be more than their budgets combined.
Yeah. And it's bad enough that
we trash China, we trash all these countries. We talk about how militaristic other countries are without even looking at ourselves. I mean, it's ridiculous to even compare the military adventure. I mean, there's no comparison.
It's bad enough that Congress allocates all the money it does, and the normal amount that we give to Israel is ridiculous. And then since the October 7th attack, they voted more. But then Biden has also just kind of on the side given them money twice that was not voted for. So, you know, it's just insane. It looks to me like Biden wants a world war. You know, instead of taking a hint when the Houthis start bombing the trade routes and saying, you know, this is really not a good idea. Let's just stop giving money to Israel, make them stop the assault on Gaza. He says, oh, that's terrible. Let's bomb Yemen. Let's, you know, we have bases all over the place that we shouldn't even have. And a couple people get killed in Jordan. And then, oh, you know, let's bomb Iran because you know, they're responsible. Just bring the troops home. Stop the empire.
And at some point, and I think we've done this on the show, but at some point, and it's like people like Kiko say, you guys really stuck with Assange. You talked about the case. You didn't really bring politics into it. But at some point, it's like this politics is a part of this because, and Susan is kind of speaking to that. It's like this is a political tool. They're using this as a political tool, even though we're not trying to use it as a political tool. They're using it, and so it's like we have to do something against that. So we're going to say things. And I'm sorry, this administration is proven to just be as much as a disaster as the previous one and the one before that one. And so it's just, as far as I'm concerned, it's like I want to stick to the issues, but it's like when people talk about, well, Kiko's like, which one do you prefer as far as like the politician? I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you're asking me that question? Like, don't ask me a question like that. I mean, they're all shit shows. I mean, I don't have a horse in this race when it comes to that. And so, like I said, when it comes to his freedom itself, I don't know what the people have as far as like that decision is made. I know that Paula said something about the Department of Justice holds really the true answer to his freedom, his quote unquote freedom. But it's just I don't know how much that's going to make a difference as far as this election is concerned, because I keep being bombarded with that kind of a question. You know, do you think it's going to make a difference? I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say no, because then it seems very nihilistic. But at the same time, it's like I don't know what is going to happen. You know, it's just it keeps going. The wheel keeps spinning, but it's like the same thing all over again. You know, how much longer do we have to talk about Assange before people get the awakening that they need? And maybe it's just simply there's just so much information that once people have made their decision because of all the government propaganda, maybe that's what it is. It's as simple as that. Those people aren't going to be changed either way. As much information as you give them, they're still going to be ignorant to what you're telling them. I don't know. But I want to believe that there is a penetration there for people to maybe see the possibility on the other side when it comes to Assange. But
we certainly hope so. He deserves it.
Yeah. Yeah, I just it's hard to it really is at this point. It's almost like it's a waiting game. It really is. It's a waiting game. And I know you all are very close following all the developments with Julian, and I try to as much as possible. And I've heard people say like, Kiko, why don't you try to get Stella onto the show? And to me, that's really hard. Like honestly, I just be 100%. I don't know if Stella would be saying anything any differently than what you all are saying. There would just be a personal, just even more personal connection with Julian. And I've watched a lot of her interviews, and I wouldn't want to bring her on just for that reason. I feel like that would be the only reason is because that's Julian's loved one, his wife, and I think she's there, she's waiting, just like the rest of us are. I mean, and I don't want to put people through unnecessary press when it's that close proximity, especially a case like this. And I know people have been visiting Julian. I think Roger Waters tries to see him as much as possible. The musician MIA is really close to the family. She's like a godparent to the family. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot of people that this affects. And to those people who have asked those questions about why I haven't brought certain people on, I guess that's the reason why. I don't feel like it's necessary. I feel like all the information we've gotten, Susan, Paula, Mike, Julie, and other people have also supplied the information. And shout out to Comrade Misty too. I don't know Comrade Misty personally, but I've heard a lot about her through other people. So I just want to say shout out to Comrade Misty because I know that she has really made this a big issue as far as her advocacy is concerned. So that's all I have here, unless you all have any final thoughts, words of encouragement, or just any sort of shout outs to anyone.
I would like to mention Caitlin Johnston's recent article. It's very good. We have a campaign online asking journalists to do one Assange tweet per day up until the February 20th hearings, to get the journalists more putting themselves in Julian's shoes. And he needs to be amplified right now by especially mainstream media, but even the indie media is coming forward. And so Caitlin wrote this great article just out saying there's a war on journalism in Belmarsh and in Gaza. And I think, what was a total 85 journalists targeted and killed in Gaza. It's not by accident. They're being targeted because they're trying to suppress the footage of what's really happening in Gaza, the disaster. And that's basically targeting the journalists there is the same of what they're doing to Julian. And so it's just, they don't want investigative journalism. So I would encourage everybody to check out Caitlin Johnston's article. And thank you, Kiko, for having us on. Thank you for being interested in the Assange case.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Yeah, you know, it's people like you that, keep it out there in the public, because otherwise, no one would have any clue who he is. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I want to think, and I want to hold something that Julia said from the last episode 67, that it is important, and it doesn't, at this point we need to really hold on to any victories, because informing the people is important. I need to stop, because I have this battle like each time I go into a show that how much impact is this stuff making? How much you always question as an activist, as an educator, like how much impact are you actually making around you, just as much as you can control. And I think that there is impact being made. It may not show up as much as you want it to, but I believe that the information is being more diffused, and I can see people changing, which is great. I'm not going to mention people by name, but I've been encouraged recently by people who I never thought would be open to maybe seeing, what we're telling people about Assange. Maybe it's harder to convince them on other things, but hey, this is a start. And so I just want to say thanks to those people who are testing themselves, because that's a really important part of this show is I don't want you to think like me. I don't want you to agree with me on most things. If you don't, you don't. I have a very wide audience, but I want you to have free thought for yourself. Don't listen to what your mom and dad are telling you, your siblings, your loved ones like that. They may not have the answers that you're looking for. You have to come to your own conclusions, but make sure that you're taking into account different points of view. I mean, that's the point. You can't have echo chambers. That's the reason why we're in the situation that we're in. It's precisely because of echo chambers. I mean, that's what the deep state wants. And people say that that's a fake term. It's not a fake term. The deep state is actually being more proven by the fact that Assange is in prison right now. That's even more evidence that deep state exists. But like my friend Ben Sedegafar was saying, I mean, this is just proven that there's an intricate network of people calling the shots or whatever, because otherwise we wouldn't even be in this situation. with Assange like fighting for his life every day and his deteriorating health and everything else that's concerned. But just try to keep an open mind as much as possible. Don't write people off based on political affiliation. That would be my final word and my advice to people, because if you're doing that, you're simply just painting a picture, and you're doing the same thing that people are doing to Assange. You're simply saying, okay, he's a hacker, he's this and that, and you're not giving him any sort of chance to be the journalist that he is. You're not even enticing that possibility. You're simply saying, you're giving him a label, and that's it. And we got to stop labeling people that are part of our working class, especially people that we see every day at work, people that we see every day in the streets. We got to stop labeling people as this and that, and try to learn from other sides and other perspectives. I mean, that's the only way we're going to get anywhere, I think. And we have to be encouraged by this resolution that's currently being proposed. Hopefully, more than 9 people can sign onto it by the end of this election cycle. But we will see. And I'll sign off that way unless you all have anything else. I think it's been a wonderful episode 93. Quite informative as usual. I can't thank you all enough for coming on to the show. And hopefully we have some good news after February 20th, February 21st. I know we're going to be following very carefully. Consortium News is another source. I think people should follow their channel, their YouTube channel, and also their website, Consortium News. And I'm going to link all I can in the episode description that can give people any sort of guidance towards Julian Assange and First Amendment, free speech, free press, any sort of related issues dealing with the Julian Assange case. Beautiful people, not the most comfortable stuff to talk about, because we're talking about human beings, a precarious situation, but at the same time, we got to persevere. We got to inform the people, tell them about it. And we got to thank Assange Defense again for giving us all this information that we wouldn't have. Paula and Susan, their work that they've given to the evidence files. And I don't know who we have in store next. I do know who we have in store next. A couple of people will keep unnamed, but I will say that Cynthia McKinney will be coming on tomorrow night. We have a lot to talk about. She's in Bangladesh currently. She's been there for years now. And I actually have someone I work with. Iwa will be on tomorrow. We're going to talk about Yoruba culture, and we're going to talk about Afro-cosmology. So we got quite a bit of. My dad's coming on soon. I believe Finkelstein is going to be making another appearance down the road. We have just, again, so many guests. I really don't know who's on the booking. I have to look at the calendar again. But we have some interesting guests coming down the road. I think it's worth it. Try to subscribe to Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum for free. If you don't like the content, don't subscribe to us. If you do like the content, tell your friends and family about us. Remember, you can't unthink free thought, and enjoy the rest of your day, beautiful people. Cheers.
Thank you.